Welcome to the Dear Christians podcast, where we have honest conversations about Christianity and culture. Today, on the Dear Christians podcast, we'll be taking a look at Christian music. Is it a ministry? Is it a market? Is it some hybrid of the two? That's what we're going to be discussing with my guest today. My guest is Johnathon Eltrevoog. Johnathon is the morning show host on WBGL, a Christian music radio station based in the Midwest. In his words, the morning show he hosts with his co-host Lindsay is basically about Jesus, food, and a few other topics. And we're very grateful that he's joined us today. You've been involved in broadcasting and radio for how many years now?
Well, let's see. We're recording this in 2019, and I think I did my first things in Christian radio in 1998, 7 or 8.
Wow.
So I'm not real thrilled about how many years are between those two points, but there's been a lot of stuff going on. I started in my hometown of Ottawa, Illinois, which is like population about 18,000, and they had a Christian radio station there, and that's kind of where I got started.
Awesome. So you've seen the industry as a whole of like Christian music and Christian media. You've seen it go through a lot of changes over the years, I'm assuming.
I think that's true, yeah.
Hopefully, I mean, to some degree, I'm sure our listeners are familiar with something about Christian music. But from your perspective, what is the purpose from where you sit of the Christian music industry?
Yeah, well, I can share what I think the purpose of the industry is, and then people listening can decide if they think that's, kingdom of God worthy or something else. But, so I work for a Christian radio station. It's kind of like a network because it has multiple outlets and frequencies in the Midwest. But so our I guess purpose statement we came up with is sharing hope in Jesus, one song, one conversation, and one heart at a time. When we're talking about Christian music, we're either talking about worship in terms of like, a recorded or live product that is being distributed to people who want to worship, whether it's God in a live setting or in their car as they listen, or they're looking for some kind of hope and encouragement. So that's our radio station has kind of hung our hat on sharing hope in Jesus. That's sort of the thing that we talk about all the time.
Okay.
And so it tends to be hope and encouragement. Now, whether you think that's the full picture of what needs to be communicated about God, there's, people will say, you need to talk about the full message of the gospel and not just the hope and encouragement parts. People have to decide for themselves what they think about that. But I will say, if the industry as a whole had to, say what it's either about worship, hope, or encouragement.
Gotcha. Okay. So do you feel like in the years that you have been working in the industry, is that a pretty accurate assessment of how it's been for years, or do you feel like that has changed since you started?
I think in the last 10 years, the industry, if we're going to call it the industry, it's kind of found its place there. Before that, it was kind of like maybe there's a little bit more of an artistic element to it, not to take away from the fact that there are some artists creating art today. But, but when it was kind of finding its way and it was maybe a little bit more unfiltered, it's just a bunch of people that were just saying, well, I don't really want to make music for, quote unquote, the world anymore. I want to make music that glorifies Jesus, and I don't really care who listens to it. I think that was sort of the early beginnings. And then as the marketers began to take hold of the messaging and how can we grow this? Because, every business has to grow or it's failing.
Yeah, that's true.
So then they said, okay, well, we can hang our hat on this hope and encouragement thing and worship thing because, that's a real need that people inside the church mostly, but also some people outside the church even look for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think that, maybe I don't know if savvy and smart is the right word, but, we've thought more about what we're doing, and this is what we've come up with.
Okay. So all of that said, understanding the ministry that is possible and has been done through these artists and through the music and through these stations and blessing other people. Why is all of this stuff a thing? I'm trying to think of a better way to phrase it. Being in the industry as long as you have, why is it shifted so much into targeting a specific demographic and embracing this idea of positive, encouraging, and worship focus?
So I think it's because, as the converging technologies took off, I think this is at least a part of it. Audiences shrink. It used to be that you could just say, okay, we're going to have a radio station and check this out. It's going to play Christian music. And everybody's like, oh my gosh, it's Christian music. You're going to put that on a radio station? Like, I don't have to just go dig in the back of the church to find the cassettes that I can listen to. And so we're going to make this mass appeal. And so it was just, regardless of what it was, well, Christian radio has to be for Christian people. That was the demographic, I think, or people that, that are, if you believe in the language of seeking, some sort of Christian or spiritual message, this is going to appeal to them, and we'll build an audience around that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so then we're thinking that we're getting smarter as time goes on. Okay, so it's not just enough to say that we have a radio station that's for Christians. What kind of Christians is this for? Is this for the Bible thumping Christians? Is this for the people who go to church only once every 6 weeks? Is it for people that are on the fringes? Is it people that have called themselves Christians, but they never go to church? Is it for people that only resonate with music, but they never read their Bible? What is this? And, we've never really, I don't think, defined it quite down that far, but we found out a way that we could write songs that would appeal to a certain subset of Christians that are really passionate about music, like that they feel that, at least from what I believe, that music is a primary way that God speaks to them. And you kind of, think whatever you want to think about that. And so who are those people that seem to really want to consume this type of music that we've been putting out for a couple of years? And they've noticed, oh, it's the women. It's the middle-aged women that tend to go after a lot of this stuff. So if you're wondering why does a radio station tend to target that type of person, it's just because they consume it more and they're passionate about it. But that's, not to say that men don't listen and young people don't listen and really old people don't listen, because they do. But they've just noticed they've had more success the more narrowly targeted they've gotten. And so, they would say, well, we need to more and more and more narrowly target so that we can, super serve this audience. But the only thing I have to say about that is I think the more narrowly we target, sometimes we have to be careful that we're not being less sophisticated, because the truth is that it's not just, a 45-year-old female listener that's listening. It's everybody that's listening.
Right.
And we have to be careful about thinking we don't overly target.
Right. So then this leads me to a question that I think might get a little more, I don't want to say controversial, but thought-provoking, hopefully. Would you say that it's almost created its own bubble?
I'm so close to it on a day-to-day basis that, we have a party going on, and it's called People That Like Christian Music and Christian Radio, and we're interacting, and we're having a great time, and we're having record audiences and record financials, and, all these things are booming. But there's a large segment of the population that you're not going to reach. But the same could be said about, country music radio or pop radio or just about anything.
Yeah.
So I like the question. Why don't you answer it?
Why don't I answer it?
Yeah. I want to hear what you have to say.
I love how you're twisting this back on me. I love that. I would say, well, I think the struggle in my mind is not whether or not it is a bubble, because I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
The real question is, how much of a bad thing is the bubble?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Sure.
Like if believers are, you're saying that the goal of this industry is to encourage people in their walk and to be uplifting and to, encourage them to worship God more. So it's for people who are within Christianity, essentially, or starting out their walk. Like that's, if that's the case, then of course it's a bubble. But you could switch out bubble with the word demographic just as easily.
Right. Or interest group or lifestyle group. Like let's look at country music, for example. And tell me that the marketing around country music is not creating a bubble.
Right. That's a good point.
There are no people in our, well, not no people, there are some, but there people don't walk around saying, well, I'm a country music person. I mean, that's a part of who they are. And some people probably would actually say that.
Yeah.
But I mean, well, I don't go around saying, well, I'm a Christian music person. Like, music is one part of my identity. It happens to be a pretty big part of my identity. But we can't just think of people in terms of, well, they go to church, they consume a Christian music product of some kind, and that's the identity of who they are. These are sort of like life interest type groups.
Yeah.
And, as we've come along and we've been selling records, and we've been selling cassettes, we've been selling CDs, and we've been selling, iTunes downloads and Spotify subscriptions, we notice that certain people gravitate to a certain style of music, and we've begun to capitalize on that.
Yeah.
And that's really all there is to it.
Right.
So, I don't think that means that Christian radio doesn't reach people, or that Christian artists don't reach people, but I mean, I sure can't say that there's not a product being sold. There absolutely is, just as much as there is in country music or anywhere else.
So then here's the thing that I think a lot of people, when they're listening to Christian radio, or they're listening to, and exploring the world of Christian music, and I know this, and I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus, but I know there are hit songs that have been sung by Christians that were not necessarily written by a believer.
Oh.
And they got successful
because they followed the formula?
Because they followed the formula, exactly. So
I've never heard of that. I'm interested in that.
And that's an aspect of that I think is worth asking. Like, if we're creating a market, essentially, there's a lot of money to be made off of Christians in the United States.
Right.
There's a lot of money to be made. So I guess, and you may not have an answer to this question, but how do we guard against, or do we even need to guard against, the idea that we've created a formula that is so easily replicated and we just keep eating it up? But it's not necessarily, maybe it's wrong to say that it's not necessarily led by the Lord, because God can use anybody and everybody, including a giant fish or, a talking donkey or whatever, to get his job done. But
so are you saying that is the thing that we're trying to guard? Are we trying to guard authentic art?
Yeah, I guess that's a way to put it. Yeah, authentic art, or authentic expression of people's faith. I think about most recently the artist NF. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Somewhat.
Huge. He's number one Billboard charts right now with his new album, The Search, that just came out. He is a Christian. His art, his lyrics are, I guess you could say they're clean, because he's not cussing, he's not swearing or anything like that, but it's definitely dealing with extremely vulnerable, very real, very raw stuff that would make people feel very uncomfortable, I think, if they were just used to listening to the stuff that, you're probably playing on the radio. And the friendly,
he's within the hip hop music genre,
right?
So
exactly, totally different genre, which is totally okay. But I just feel like, and he even expresses it in his songs a lot. Like, there's this pressure to have to conform to the way that the industry operates, whether it's him getting sucked into the secular world and choosing to maintain his lyrics a certain way and not conform to the idea of having to cuss or having to be all about, just all the stuff that hip hop is about. But then at the same time, also feeling pressure from the Christian culture and Christian music industry to have to fit the mold of what a Christian artist is supposed to be like and what they're supposed to be singing about, or to be fitting this mold of what a good Christian artist is supposed to be like. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, and right. And the truth is that he doesn't have to do anything,
Right.
Just like all of our artists, if we want to be successful in a certain subculture, maybe we have to be, maybe we have to feel like we have to do things a certain way. But the fact of the matter is, you can go make your own art that nobody listens to.
Right.
If you want to express yourself, but if you want to consume something that people agree with, resonate with, feel in their soul, you have to speak a certain way. And so that's why I was wondering, are we talking about, the threat of getting away too far from authentic art, or are we talking about the threat of, sort of denying our Lord and Savior in the process and our ultimate devotion to Him? Are we talking about the cleansing of the temple type thing where Jesus and the money changers in the temple and, all that kind of stuff, calling them a den of thieves? Which thing are we talking about?
Yes. Both and. I mean, I feel like, okay, so that does raise a question of, I guess you could say a theological or an ethical quandary of, and you brought up the money changers and all of that with Jesus and him being upset about it. Do you feel, what would you say to someone who said, yeah, but this whole industry is making money off of Jesus?
Right. And that's been said for sure.
What would you say? What would you say to that?
Well, first of all, I'd say, well, then I must be a part of it, because my, most of my streams of income are either from my full-time employment, which is, part of this industry that we're talking about, that I'm paid a salary to present a certain radio thing on the radio and play songs and interact with the listeners and pray with them and, give them advice if they ask for it, and go to these different things. And then I have a side business that does a lot, I work with voiceovers and I work with production, and I do put things together that are consumed by a Christian audience. And so I'd have to say, first of all, I better not judge them too hard, because I'm one of them.
Right. Yeah.
That's where I found my, my livelihood, as have, and then we can get into talking about things like the paid laity, and we can talk about pastoral salaries, and, we can talk about the Apostle Paul saying, well, if you're out there, proclaiming the gospel, you should be able to, support yourself for it. He was making a philosophical statement there in the New Testament. By the way, he chose to say, but I'm not going to do it.
Yeah. Right.
So kind of interesting. So it's all these kind of things. I don't know if pastors should be paid, but Christian radio DJs shouldn't. I mean, we serve a lot of, we're not pastors, but we serve some pastoral purpose, I would say. People that are on the air dealing with a large volume of phone calls and prayer requests and, asking for encouragement and those kinds of things. So making money off of Jesus is definitely not a new thing. Ever since we started, paying people to be itinerant ministers and, people that are planting churches and we're paying for church mortgages and things along those lines. So it's a huge topic, and it's hard to know exactly where to get into that. But it's always, at the end of the day, it's always going to come down to motive. And if let's just say I'm somebody who has a certain skill set, okay, so I can talk and make a fairly coherent point, and therefore I can market myself to a radio station that will employ me to say certain things on the radio. Now, I could be working in a mainstream environment, reading the news or doing a political talk show or giving relationship advice or whatever people do on the radio, or just trying to sound cool. And I could go do that and, whatever. But if I choose to work in a Christian environment, or the place I work says its purpose statement is not to make money, and I believe that because of how long I've been here. But it actually is to share hope and and I've been in the meetings where decisions are made, and not every radio station's the same way. But I probably shouldn't work at a Christian radio station or a Christian anything unless I feel like A, God's calling me to do it, B, I have something to say, and I'm not just here to read liner cards and tell people to go to our website to get more information. But if I have something to contribute and something to offer specifically in a ministry environment that I couldn't do in some other mainstream kind of environment, then I think it's okay for me or any of my colleagues to quote unquote, make a reasonable living off of, whether it's Jesus or the gospel or the ministry or however it is. But I've also, not naming any names, met some people that haven't had anything to say for years. And the only reason they're doing this is because it's the only thing they've ever known how to do. And in my opinion, maybe that would have been better if they'd gone and found other kind of work, but they can fake it just enough to get by.
Yeah.
And I think I'm talking about pastors in the churches too, feel this way.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And so that's where I have to start looking and saying, okay, is my primary gut soul motivation that I just don't have anything else to do, and I got to hang on to this for dear life. And that's like I got to check in with myself about that every now and then.
Yeah. So let's go back for a second about this idea of the expectations that are placed on artists. And I'm going to throw a few names out here because I feel like there's artists throughout history in the Christian industry that have started their industry as being Christian, and then they've quote unquote crossed over to the secular world. And whether that was them just using the industry as a platform to get their name out first, or whether it was something changed in them or whatever. But I think of like artists like the Gungor Band, and they're essentially choosing to leave Christianity as a whole. I think about Jennifer Knapp coming out as being a lesbian, and that was like a huge thing like, a number of years ago. She was on Larry King and like the whole deal. And more recently, I think about, and this is definitely not your guys' demographic, but the band Under Oath was huge in the Christian music industry for a long time. And then they took a break for several years. And as it turns out, one of their lead singers, Spencer, he was dealing with very real, very serious issues of depression and substance abuse and wrestling and struggling with his faith. A lot of that came out, particularly about the drug abuse and addiction issues that he was having. And according to the band, they felt like they just got crucified by the Christian community. And so they stopped. They stopped making music. They stopped doing tours. And Spencer gave an interview a while ago about how he has left Christianity. Not necessarily every one of the artists in the band have, but he left Christianity. And a big part of that reason was because when he was struggling, he felt like he was getting a lot of anger, a lot of resentment, hatred, whatever word you want to use, from the Christian community, and people saying, how could you do that? And yada, yada, yada. Like they were placing him on this pedestal in a time when what he really needed was people to say, dude, we're praying for you. Like, how can we help you? And that sort of thing. And in the secular world, there were people in the industry who know the struggle of what it's like to deal with drug addiction. And they were there to be supportive and point him in the right direction to try and overcome his demons, for lack of a better term.
That's great.
But he left Christianity, and much in part because of the response that the Christian culture gave to him as an artist after they put this band on a pedestal. And I feel like the Christian community does that a lot, especially with artists.
Yeah.
And so I wonder about what your thoughts are after seeing things like the Gungor Band, like Jennifer Knapp, like Under Oath, and others. I mean, we could name a whole bunch of them. Like, do you feel like there's something to be learned or something to be changed, or is there something changing in the way that Christian culture can or should be responding to artists who are really just, they're just people that God gave a gift and they're trying to use it? Like, how do we support the artists, and how do we help them when they're not fitting the mold, as it were, of what we expect to have out of a Christian artist?
Yeah, what I was going to say is it kind of reminds me of sports. Like everybody's kind of an armchair quarterback, and you go to a Super Bowl, or just a bunch of guys getting together watching football, and they're all going to criticize the coach first of all. What plays are the coach making?
Yeah,
and then what plays? What are the artists or the are the players able to perform well on the field? And then, of course, they are the ultimate holders of all things that are knowledge and sacred. And the fan is the ultimate, the consumer, because in our culture, the ultimate voice and the ultimate rightness always lies with the consumer. It's never the person that's out there producing the product, or the small business, or anybody that's actually providing these experiences for you to addict yourself to. It's always that the consumer is right. And so it's kind of the same thing. I think a lot of people have no clue. Like if you just work a regular job, and maybe you listen to radio on your way into work or not, maybe it's Christian, maybe it's something else. You go to church once a week or once a month or whatever it is, and you just sort of like haphazardly consume these things. And then when you hear something you don't like, you harshly judge it. You don't have any idea what it's like to be the person on the other side of the recording or the other side of the microphone, who they every day have to show up with some kind of creative content that is going to be spoken in a certain way, that it relates to people of many different backgrounds, of cultural diversity, personal struggle diversity, many forms of diversity, and sort of have to communicate in a mass setting. Most people have no idea how to do that. And that's why most people are boring to listen to in conversation.
Right.
Because they don't know how to have, whether it's radio or whether it's writing a song for a lot of people to consume, they don't realize that you have to trim off a little on the left and trim off a little on the right to get something that reaches the most amount of people.
Yeah.
Most people have no clue what that's like.
Yeah.
And so they hear something that they don't relate to or something that they want to judge or they can't personally identify with, such as whether it's the homosexuality thing, the doubt that Gungor has experienced in his life, whether it's the fact that they hear a cuss word in an Under Oath song, they hear somebody referencing drugs or alcohol or, whether it's okay to touch any of those substances or anything like that. And all of a sudden it's let's attack the messenger because, hey, we've gotten ourselves into our social media culture where anybody can say anything they want anytime.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And self-righteousness prevails.
Yeah,
and,
right.
And I think that's the problem. So whether that's the problem, people on my side of the microphone struggle with false humility, self-righteousness, pride. So do the people on the consuming side.
Yeah.
But they're the armchair quarterbacks that it's very easy for them to criticize because they have no appreciation or understanding of what it took to come up with this combination of science and art and then deliver it to somebody in a mass setting.
Right.
I think it's a lot of ignorance, but then you do have sometimes people on the artist performer side that also are a little bit on the careless side or on the I don't care what anybody thinks, I'm just going to put it out there side. And and so that doesn't make for a happy meeting sometimes.
Yeah, and I guess that kind of brings us a little bit back around to the tension that has to probably exist for artists when it comes to making sacrifices on the level of vulnerability that you may want to have to create your art and to create your music. And because if you want it to reach a wider audience, you have to target a very specific audience, which then kind of paints you into a corner a little bit.
Right.
And so it's like there's almost this struggle that I totally understand is probably going on in the minds of a lot of artists in general, but then especially in the Christian artist world where it's like, okay, I want to do this for a living, but if I want to do this for a living, the larger majority of people listening are probably not going to love XYZ aspect of how I would maybe want to write my music or what I would want to write about, because that's maybe a little too much, or that's a little too intense, or that's not enough times of referencing the Lord, or it's not,
yeah.
And like there's a real struggle there. And I feel like that kind of gets to the heart of, I guess what a lot of this conversation is about. Like, is that a problem? Like, do you think that dynamic of this industry that totally exists now can be a negative? Could it be a bad thing? Is there maybe some room for change there? And how does that change?
I don't think it's a bad thing because I believe in free speech. And I know that's not something that Christians usually say because it's like, oh, we can't believe in free speech because then somebody might cuss. I believe in free speech, and I think our marketplace now is open enough to where you can get music free on YouTube or Spotify or wherever.
Yeah.
That if you have something to say that doesn't fit the filter of Christian or any other kind of radio, just say it and see if you can get an audience. And there's nothing wrong with that. And even if you say things that are really objectionable and really, terrible doxology and theology and all this kind of stuff. But if you want to say it, put it out there. And, at least in this country, we have freedom of speech that's protected by our Constitution, and put it out there. And whether anybody consumes it or not, that's on you. But, I don't think there's not any one clearinghouse, one theological clearinghouse. Like I remember hearing Hillsong United, I think it was in their documentary, saying that before they put a song out, since they're based in a church, they have to run it past their elders or theologians or whoever they are to say, okay, this song can have the Hillsong brand on it.
Interesting. Okay.
This is what we believe. And that's probably a good idea. If you're going to put your church's name on it, you better.
Yep, that makes sense.
So they wrote a song, and this is my understanding. They wrote a song and they wanted to play it that night in concert, but they were in the U.S. and everybody was sleeping. All their theologians in Australia were sleeping, and so
they had to delay it.
Yeah, they had to get him up. Like, would you guys please wake up and listen to this and approve it so we can play it on stage tonight? And
Wow.
you have to do whatever works for you in your little bubble, whether it's as small as your church elders approving your music, or whether it's as large as, well, if I want my music on this radio station or on, this Spotify playlist, then it has to fit this certain mold because it hits a large, intersection of Christian music consumers. But that's your decision as an artist. I mean, there's no right or wrong to me. It's going to irritate me if somebody puts out things that I disagree with in terms of theological belief, but we're so fragmented anymore, and we're so consumerist that I just say, put it out and see if you can get an audience. If you can't, you might have to water it down, and then you're going to have to live with yourself.
Yeah, that's a good point. So then, okay, so let me maybe kind of close out with this. I feel like this conversation is probably consumed by our audience a little bit differently depending on if they are a follower of Jesus or if they are not.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't help but thinking about how the Christian music industry and the market that exists and all of the product that we put out there, though it's targeted for new believers and people who've been following the Lord for a while, and like all the different ranges of where people are in their spiritual walk, but all of that is still out there to be viewed and looked at by people who don't know Jesus.
Yes.
And I wonder what message the industry as a whole is sending to the unbelievers that are out there when we start looking at the more difficult complexities of artist integrity versus meeting a mass audience and all of that. When, I mean, they're like, well, aren't you supposed to just love God and love people like Jesus did? Like, that's like the whole thing. And then now we're creating these niche kind of massive multi-million-dollar industry for that. But let me read this to you. I'll just get your reaction from this. This is George, is it Perdikis? Is that his last name? Right? One of the original artists of the Newsboys. Back in the 80s, he left 1990. Back in 2007, he declared that he was an atheist.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2015, I don't know how many people read this or are aware of it, but there was a blog called The Friendly Atheist, and he wrote an article in response to his experience with the Christian music industry. And I'll just read this and just kind of get your feedback on it, because I feel like this kind of talks a little bit about the perception that some people who don't know Jesus might have of like Christian media and the Christian music industry and the culture. And I'll just love to get your response to it. So,
okay.
He says the Newsboys were featured in the movie God's Not Dead. The movie demonstrated the pervasive attitude of Christians. They demonized everyone while giving a pass to their own particular brand of Christianity, making themselves look like fluffy white angels with perfect synchronized lives. Instead of wearing a mask of righteousness, they should acknowledge that they are struggling as much as everyone else. Now that is a movie that I would like to see. End quote.
Nice.
How about that, right?
Oh, how about that? So first of all, I've been waiting for this part of the interview because I had a feeling you were going to bring up the Newsboys. I have a gift for you, man. You
have a gift for me?
Would you like to have your gift right now?
Oh, sure.
Okay, here we go.
God's not dead. He's surely alive.
There it is. There it is.
Yeah.
Yep, there it is. There it is. Huge hit.
Okay.
Huge hit.
Yes.
Right?
Huge. Well, I think they made 3 movies.
Yeah, there's 3 movies out. Now, to be perfectly clear and totally transparent, I have seen 2 out of the 3.
Okay.
I personally am not a big Newsboys fan, and I don't know that I've ever really been a Newsboys fan. Like, I've been like, okay, yeah, people like them, whatever.
Well, then we just got to end this call right now because I saw them less than 10 days ago.
Really?
So no, I'm kidding. Oh no, yeah, I did see him in concert in Austin, Texas, less than 10 days ago, and cool. I have a little bit of an updated perspective on specifically that band, but I'm using it more as an illustration because I don't think George was saying, I want to see a movie about the Newsboys that acknowledges their personal struggles. He's using that as representation of the whole industry, saying, why can't we be a little bit more authentic? And he's chosen to be an atheist in this stuff. I have a good friend that actually just went to Hawaii to something, I think they call it Love Song Getaway. It's like this just beautiful Hawaiian resort. And it's like you want to talk about a Christian bubble. They get all the Christians there that want to sort of like improve their marriage or just enjoy their marriage, honestly. And they leave kids home and they go to Hawaii and they see a bunch of Christian concerts and they listen to Christian speakers and they enjoy paradise. Does that sound bad? Not most of it.
Not most of it.
You can decide which parts. But so my friend said, and the Newsboys were like the hosts of this thing. And my friend said, because I was talking to him about this quote that from George, one of the founders of the Newsboys, where he says, I'd like to see, instead of wearing a mask of righteousness, the Newsboys or any band should acknowledge that they're struggling as much as anyone else. And he said, can I tell you that Michael Tate, who today's the lead singer of the Newsboys, this is coming from my friend who was there. He said, Michael Tate said this on stage for like 5 minutes verbatim, that, he and the rest of the band, they struggle as much as everyone else. He goes, it's funny that quote was that, because I can't tell you how long Michael Tate went on about this from stage. And so I don't know Michael Tate. I don't know the Newsboys. So I can't sit here and say I'm defending everything that they do, but that was just his reaction saying, oh, wow, that's actually exactly what they're doing.
Yeah. And I mean, to be fair, the Newsboys have gone through quite the roster change, as it were, over the last several decades too. So, I mean, Michael Tate used to be part of DC Talk and
totally different Christian music scene back then. But so I think that, because I'm not denying that there is this thing that, if you're sort of part of a professionally signed Christian music label, radio marketed Christian group, that you do have to fit some sort of image or persona that remains in 2019. And I do think that whether it's the Newsboys or anybody else, they're probably frustrated too, because there's parts of them that they don't feel like they can express. It is a job. And you have to do things that are consistent with your job description. For example, my favorite one of my second favorite artist of all time is Billy Joel. And he is not a Christian man, and he will tell you that. And if he got on stage and said, I just love God so much, can we just give the Lord a hand right now? Everybody. He is not knowing his audience. Now, maybe there are Christians in the audience like myself that love Billy Joel, but that's not going to be good for business for Billy Joel to get up on stage and do that stuff. In the same way, the Newsboys or Mercy Me or Casting Crowns or any of these other artists, it's not going to be good for them to do certain things on stage because of certain, success and business practices.
Yeah.
So I'll give them that. You're talking, he mentioned something about, the Newsboys give a pass to their own particular brand of Christianity, making themselves look like fluffy white angels with perfect synchronized lives.
Yeah.
You know who else does that? You ever heard the names Chip and Joanna Gaines?
Yeah. Oh, there you go.
Okay. So Fixer Upper. So and these are the exalted, HGTV people that fix up people's houses, but they're exalted in the Christian community because they're this. I could almost read this verbatim. Fluffy white angels.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about race here. I'm talking about
right.
But these synchronized lives, they seem like they got it all together. I was at their Magnolia Silos in Waco, Texas, a couple weeks ago, and everything is marketed again to this subset of people that like pretty things and shiplap and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, well, but that is a reality TV show. And so is certain forms of Christian music. A Newsboys concert is a reality TV show. It's based on reality, but it's not the full thing. And so I don't think it's fair to say that Christian music artists have to bear all their dirty laundry on stage, but no other performing arts have to do that. They can just present, their art on stage and leave. So I think there's that. When you're talking about,
that's a good point.
By the way, I think this is the best question that you asked me today. I really feel the heart of your question about the mission and what people that are not a part of the Church of Jesus Christ, when they hear a Christian music marketed product on my radio station, they're scanning through the dials. What message are we giving them? Because you said, well, aren't they just supposed to be about loving God and loving people? Actually, I think the mainstream society's general view of the church is that of judgment. I mean, all the research that I've been seeing lately is, we hate people that struggle with homosexuality, or that don't struggle with it, that just say that's what I am and whatever, same-sex attraction or however you quantify that. Our main things are that we hate people that are gay. We hate people that have had abortions or are even thinking about it, and we'll never speak with them again. We only vote Republican, this and that. And I know we're not here to talk politics today, but I think that's primarily the quote-unquote world's response to the church. I don't think they even know that we're supposed to be loving God and loving people. And so if they interact with something that's genuine, and I hope it's me on my show, talking honestly as I can in this mass-marketed product about, legitimate struggles that I do have. And when I talk about things, I don't just get on the radio and talk about myself. I talk about the things that I think the audience that I want to reach also deals with.
Yeah.
And then somewhere in the middle, I think we can have some shared interaction. And I think that's where some of our best conversations happen on the radio. And then loving people all throughout that, and cheering people on, and affirming them, and asking them questions and being interested in them and showing deep empathy for people. That is as Christian as it gets. I mean, that sounds a lot like what Jesus did. And then, of course, pointing them toward the kingdom of heaven as opportunity arises.
Yeah. Do you feel in your position working in broadcasting and at a Christian radio station, do you feel like there's pressure on you to have to present a certain image to your audience in order to be heard?
No, I don't. I mean, there are topics about myself that I'll never talk about on the radio, but that's not because my boss won't let me. It's because I'm either too proud or too embarrassed.
Fair enough.
But it's never my boss. It's never my industry that's saying, "Ooh, you can't do that." Maybe when I first worked here and I hadn't figured out, but like I feel that my personal workplace is the best Christian radio station there is, and they give me the freedom and they have the confidence in me and my partner that I'm on with to discuss any topic we want. So like I don't feel any pressure whatsoever. If there's any pressure, it's in my own mind about like, is this and it's more like the pride and the whatever that other thing I said a minute ago, fear and pride of, do I really want to dig that deep just as a person?
Yeah.
But it's never on behalf of the brand. I shouldn't be talking about this.
Okay.
Maybe I know for sure there are radio stations that put that pressure on their personalities, and mine isn't one of them. And I am really thankful.
Good. That's awesome. So wrapping all of this up, talking about the ministry of Christian radio and the necessary aspect of it being a business and I mean, really making money. I mean, you have to bring in revenue and get an audience. What would you say is the worst part of that dynamic, and what is the best part about working in this industry?
The best part is that I get to talk about Jesus every day. And even on days when I go to work and I go home and all I interact with is the people listening to the radio, my coworkers, and my family. And I do the typical go into my garage, shut the door, attached garage, shut the door, don't talk to anybody in the world. I still have the chance to interact with at least tens of thousands of people that listen to our show every day about Jesus. And so whether that's fulfilling my job as the Great Commission, I don't know that I just want to hang my hat on that, but that's the best part from my perspective of the industry. And I think artists would say the same thing. I get to sing of Jesus. I get to share my faith. I get to, explain the gospel, and I get to explain how good God is and why I believe everybody should love him. That's the best part. The worst part is that there are people involved in it. And this comes with false humility, self-righteousness, pride, inauthenticity, and I hate that. And I hate it in myself, and I hate it in people that, judgment. I hate when, we got to listener the other day, I mean, we joke around and say our show is about Jesus and food. So we basically, those are all the things that we talk about, Jesus and food. And of course, that's not true. We talk about all kinds of things, but that's kind of what we say to attract people's attention. And one lady said that you guys never talk about Jesus. Well, that's actually not true. We talk about him all the time. We don't, it's not calculated, but he's a significant part, if not the most significant part of our show. But whatever she's hearing, once she listens once a day or a couple times a week, she's only hearing us joking around. And so she gets on here and just judges the heck out of us in our texting and just really ripping us to shreds and all this kind of stuff. I mean, my co-host was in tears because it was particularly directed at her at that moment. And I hate that. Yeah. I mean, that's self-righteousness and pride at its best.
Yeah.
And I hate interacting with that kind of thing. And I think, when Jesus in the Beatitudes says, blessed are the meek, I think one aspect of meekness is the fire in your belly that exists towards things that are done in Jesus' name. Like she was all about, you guys need to be talking about God and you are terrible people because you're not, like all that was being communicated in such a hateful way that it negated the source. And that isn't good. And so it is a meek attitude that Jesus is talking about that just can't stand that kind of thing. If you feel that way, that sort of righteous indignation towards self-righteousness and false humility and pride in yourself and others, I mean, you're being meek. And that's the worst part. But again, the best part is getting to talk about this stuff every day.
Yeah. And that makes me think about like just the value of speaking the truth in love. Like both components are necessary, You can get real heavy on speaking the truth, or at least the truth as you see it from your perspective, like this lady that's only catching the goofy parts of your show. But if she's not speaking any of it in love, then what's the point, like resounding gong or clanging cymbal, right?
Resounding gong or clanging cymbal is somebody that deserves to be slapped.
Exactly.
Let me ask you this, Dan.
Yeah.
Let's say you had a Christian radio morning show with tons of listeners and people liked you and you had a rapport with the audience and you could pretty much, you were working for the best organization in Christian radio, which happens to be my organization. And they put you on there and they say, you can talk about anything you want. Would you only talk 100% of the time about Christian topics?
No, not at all.
Why not?
Well, the obvious answer is that you're reaching out to a massive potential audience through the airwaves that's not going just directly to Christians' radios, and you want to be able to connect with people about the things that they care about. And one of those things would obviously be Jesus, and it hopefully would be the most important one. But yeah, I wouldn't talk about just that all the time because I mean, find ways to mention it and plug it in and connect it to that for sure. And here's the interesting thing, like if you think about the application of the gospel and the call to be an ambassador for the kingdom of heaven, you look at examples in scripture like Paul, like he walks up and he uses what he knows about the culture to start conversations that eventually lead to Jesus. But it's not like, I mean, going back to it again, you need to know your audience, right? So, yeah.
Well, and we feel that, like it's a fine line because we feel that humor is, my pastor, when I went to a certain church, he quoted this MTV article that said, humor is the new rock and roll. So rock and roll used to be the cool thing and the way that you could relate to other people in the culture. Oh yeah, rock and roll. Now it's humor. So it's not just that we're trying to be funny for humor's sake, that we think we're these comedians on the radio, which we totally are not. It's that we leverage things like humor and connection and relatability so that people can say, oh, okay, so they're not stuffy. So these are like people I would want to hang out with.
Right.
So anytime that we're using humor, the goal is that we're using that as a tool to be on the same page with somebody else, in my opinion, so that we can keep them listening, and eventually they're going to hear soon about Jesus and why he cares about them. And you know,
Right.
and that's the most altruistic thing that I can say about it. Now, sometimes you get carried away and, okay, let's rein it in a little bit here, because, you know, we're not.
Yeah, right.
We're not that funny.
That happens.
but it's a tool. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. So last thing. I know I've said that like a dozen times now, but last thing, if you were to speak to the whole of Christianity about this issue, like writing a letter to all Christians, we could send it directly to their inbox, or maybe for anybody over 60, we'd mail it to them. Millennials, you'd have to text it to them. But
that's right.
If you could write a letter, an open letter to Christians about the music industry, what would you say? Dear Christians, what?
All right. So I would start out with, and not just out of necessity, but this is really what's in the bottom of my heart, the last two Bible verses I read today. One of them is kind of a good snapshot of the gospel. So Romans 3:22, we're made right with God by placing our faith in Jesus Christ. And this is true for everyone who believes, no matter who we are. And so that, to me, that's just dear Christians, everybody, not just in the Christian music industry, but that's counterfeiting the thing that's in my heart that says, no, it's all up to me. It's really up to my own morality. It's really up to my own performance. It's really up to my own, ego, or my own reputation. That's what's going to make me successful in life, and it's really just all about this world. And this takes it away completely. And it's the part of Romans where Paul starts unpacking the whole justification by faith thing. So we're made right with God actually by placing our faith in Jesus Christ. That's true for everybody. I don't care who you are, basically, is what Paul's saying. That's number one. The other one would be, this is definitely like, dear Christians, 1 John 3:18, let us not love in word, neither in tongue, but in deed and truth. So putting action behind what we're saying. Don't tell me you're going to do anything. Do it. And so that's both ends of the spectrum. That's both kind of the, justification by faith in Jesus. That's how we have a relationship with God. And the whole, James thing about like faith without works is dead. So we got to get both of those. And then the rest of the letter would probably just have something to do with not taking ourselves so seriously, being genuine, asking God for help every day, and just giving me strength for today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me about all of this. And thank you for listening to the Dear Christians podcast. If you want to learn more about our guest, or if you'd like to partake in the conversation around this and other episodes, check us out on Facebook. It's just Dear Christians Podcast. We're also on Instagram, and you are welcome to join in on the conversation. Please share this episode if you found it interesting with someone that you think would be valuable to have this conversation with yourself. And continue to pray for us here at the Dear Christians Podcast as we continue to engage in challenging conversations that take an honest look at Christianity and culture.